Good morning, everybody. Hello.
Good
Hi.
morning. Hi.
Hiya.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess technical checks are done. We have started the meeting already, but I just want to express my appreciation before we start that you accepted our invitation to speak at this seminar. Quite important. I don't know if all of us, in a way, I think we know of each other. I know Hikmet because he's also
Perhaps
from my
not as much as I
region.
would like, of course.
Yeah, so perhaps maybe before everyone else joins, if we wanna just go around, so I'll maybe start with Hikmet. He is the first on my left. Yeah.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Dr. Hikmet Karčić from University of Sarajevo. I'm expert in genocide studies and far-right movements in Western Balkans. And together with Dan, I am member of the International Republican Institute Task Force for the Western Balkans.
Thank you, Hikmet. Dr. Pawelz is next on my end.
Yes. Well, thank you for the invitation. My name is Janina Pawelz, and I am a researcher at the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy at the University of Hamburg. And I lead a project on conspiracy theories and far-right ideologies. And personally, when I heard about the EU Horizon project, I was reminded that I was part of a Horizon 2020 project once. And I remember all the webinars we had and going to Brussels and presenting and lots of snippets we had to fulfill. So I feel you and I wish you good luck in succeeding.
Thank you so much. Professor Abbas?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Tahir Abbas. I'm a professor of radicalization studies at Leiden University, the Institute of Security and Global Affairs. So I'm leading the DRIVE project, which is coming to a crashing halt very soon, in about 3 months. We haven't got much time left. We've got a lot to do. European Commission funded projects, so many things to tie up. But that's been all about trying to understand social exclusion and its impact on radicalization. And they're not entirely separate concepts, but at the same time, there's a bit of a reach when we start with social exclusion because that captures a lot. But what we can try to do about it is through ideas of integrative complexity. So not what people think, but how people think, and perhaps working on that as a way to limit the problems of extremism. Otherwise, I'm a social scientist, mostly a sociologist, so I'm interested in minority discourses. And this minority-majority relationship is very interesting, not just for the DARE project, but also for this webinar, which I'm very much looking forward to. Thank you.
And us in the region have a lot to offer in that regard. For the Sara, Dr. Wilford joined us as well. She has started the SMIDGE project in a way, getting us all together. We were just going, Sara, around before the meeting officially starts at 11, the webinar, that we just get to know each other a bit better. So Professor Abbas was telling us about another Horizon project, right? DRIVE is Horizon funded, as far as I remember. Ending in 3 months, and this relationship between minority and majority in our region in Balkans, I think it's quite interesting study in that regard. So, Dr. Hall?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I am Natalie-Anne Hall. I'm currently working at Cardiff University in social sciences. I'm a sociologist as well, and I did my PhD research about Brexit on Facebook and its relationship with far-right and with populist discourses. And I've also worked with Hilary Pilkington on a project called DARE, which I think has quite similar aims to DRIVE that Professor Abbas was speaking of. And I've also worked on the Everyday Misinformation project at Loughborough, and I'm an affiliate at the moment on Mistranslating Deceit, which is another AHRC UKRI-funded project that's very interesting about disinformation. So my interests overlap a lot with you guys, and I'm really happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hall. Sara?
Oh, hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Sara Wilford. I'm the coordinator, one of the coordinators for the SMIDGE Project. I have a background as I'm the co-director of the Center for Computing and Social Responsibility at Montfort University. My background is mainly into privacy and data protection surveillance. But I found that do you know what? It was Brexit too. So the whole Brexit campaign was just astonishing. As a Brit from within it, it felt like an absolute disaster from the beginning. But it was quite obvious that there was a serious amount of disinformation and misinformation being targeted by social media or on social media to these people. What led me to have a greater interest, which is where the SMIDGE project really started to take shape, if you like, was to do with the fact that whenever you look at any research across the world, there is a big focus on young people. Let's not turn them into extremists. I get that completely. And then there's the concern of the over 50. I sound like I'm doing my intro already. This is the concern about the over 50s. But we don't have, I don't know about you, but a lot of people in power, most people in power are over 50. You know, Elon Musk, you know, they're all over 50. Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, they're all over 50. Oh, well, I think he's close. But the point is, lots and lots of people in power are over 50. But they are subsumed into the same group as the 96-year-old sitting in a care home being cared for. They're over 52. So what happens is that this group is ignored, and it's been totally ignored, and yet they are powerful. They are invisible but powerful. They are making the decisions. When you see videos of people, you know, sort of being extreme and protests and everything else, quite often, if they're not actually doing it, they're in the sidelines going, go on, get on with it, do it. They're all excited of pushing these other people forward. So they are invisible, but they're pushing from the sidelines. So I'm talking too much. But it has become a huge passion of mine. The more we get involved, Danny's smiling because, you know, the more we get into this, the more exciting it becomes, and the more we realize as a consortia how little work has been done on this group in this area. So there you go. That's me. Yeah. Very excitable.
Thanks. Thank you, Sara. So I think this we also see our participants, people who have registered to attend this the webinar, starting to dial in. So I don't know if maybe we should give it another 2 minutes for people to come in, or maybe we can start already. I guess, yeah.
Whenever maybe, you want.
Yeah. So we can be like a Swiss. In the Balkans, we are not known for punctuality, but I guess in this case,
I'm not known for punctuality.
Okay, so yeah, I guess we'll give it to 2 minutes then. Maybe just if others will join, because I'm sure many would like, those who have registered would perhaps not want to miss the introductory remarks. So just a technical note between us. So we'll start with each, making introductory remarks. I know Dr. Pawelz prepared a PowerPoint. I want to thank you for that. And then once the presentations are over, we'll get into a back and forth with questions and answers. Colleagues who are joining, who are attending the webinar, can pose their questions. And then it will be my job as moderator to bring them up so we can discuss them. I think that will be the approach. I have my couple of questions myself I have prepared that I would like us to discuss together, but of course I will try to give as much priority to the questions that will come from people who have registered to attend the webinar. So yeah, 1 more minute. Oh, it's done. So okay, let us officially kickstart the webinar on understanding the far right in the EU and the Western Balkans. It is my distinct privilege and honor to moderate this webinar with colleagues who have written extensively on this and who have been researching this topic. So I'm honored to be joined by Professor Abbas, Dr. Pawelz, Dr. Hall, and Dr. Karčić, and my colleague, Dr. Wilford from SMIDGE Project. So before I invite our esteemed colleagues to make the presentations, I just want to give the floor again to Sara, just to explain a bit the SMIDGE project and give us also, on her behalf, a welcome note. Sara.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danny. And thank you, everybody, for coming to this webinar. I think it's going to be a really helpful and useful discussion and conversation to get some new ideas about how we can tackle this. So the SMIDGE Project, Social Media Narratives Addressing Extremism in Middle Age. I've already said a couple of things earlier, but the point is what we were considering was that extremism, it goes across, it's a global issue. We know this is a global issue, and it is an issue that is growing all of the time, and we know that it is influenced by what is put out on social media. Social media has a huge impact on the way that the narrative is framed and how people actually perceive what is truth and what is not truth. This blurring of lines is something that we're all aware of and concerned about. But one of the things that the SMIDGE Project is particularly interested in is looking at this group, this age group of 45 to 65, the group that is invisible, the group that is never researched, the group that is subsumed into this over 50s, which includes the 96-year-old in a care home. The point is middle-aged people are invisible, but powerful. Middle-aged people are the powerful instigators of a lot of the extremist media that we see out and about. So what we want to do in the SMIDGE Project, and this will obviously feed into a lot of the other activities, and I hope that our work will inform your work, because obviously we're looking at a niche area and this covers everyone. But what we're trying to do is to understand the language and the characteristics of this particular group, because it's all very well making videos to, and resources for younger people to attract them to it so they can understand and get counter narratives and all the rest of it. But unfortunately, if you are, say, 60, you're not going to be in the slightest bit interested or taken in or anything by, the music of a 20-year-old. Or the themes that a 20-year-old would be interested in. They have a completely different understanding and set of interests. So one of the things that we're going to try and do is to understand what are those differences? What can we find out about them? And from there, we will be developing counter narratives that are specifically aimed at this group, that have the right music and the right references that people can relate to, so that they can actually think, oh, this is relevant to me. Because one of the bigger problems is that a lot of these people are self-taught on computers and social media. They're not digital natives. So what's happened is they are thinking to themselves, oh, I understand. I get this. I know how to use social media. I know how to turn on the computer. I am educated, powerful. I don't need to be taught a different approach or to be taught about how the internet really works. So we have this group that are powerful, that are self-taught, that have not had any sort of education, if you like, about the dangers and what happens on the internet. So we are going to also be creating educational tools so that we can help people to be more reflexive about what they view and what they post and what they share. And we're also going to be developing some policy documents so that we can help decision makers to actually come up with policies that embrace the different parts of our community and that doesn't just focus on youth or stopping them from going into extremism, or very older people and learning how to switch on a computer and how to navigate turning on the internet and all that sort of thing. This group is a group that has been neglected, and we are going to address that. So I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar. I think it's a really, really great idea to be looking at a much broader picture and considering across Europe and the Balkans how extremism is different but similar, and what are some of the things that we can recognise as key themes that affect us all, that we can all work with. And so, yeah, without further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome everybody to the webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilford. So, and for laying the context of the project and the topic we are discussing today. So this is the first webinar of the 4 we will do, and we have chosen to focus on the far right because we have upcoming elections for European Parliament in June. There is a lot of if I can say, alarming articles we read across the media about the far right growing in influence, growing in support. It is presenting a challenge, I think, far-right extremism, also in the Western Balkans. And somehow it seems sometimes our region becomes a rallying point for some of the far-right narratives. But it is fundamentally challenging to some of the democratic values upon which there is a societal consensus, at least. So without further ado, I would like to start our conversation by inviting Professor Abbas to make introductory remarks, and I will continue with Dr. Pawelz, Dr. Hall, and Dr. Karčić, who has done an amazing work in mapping some of the far-right in Western Balkans in imagery. Professor Abbas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you all for the opportunity to be with you and to share with you and to learn from you. So I've just got a few talking points around some of the concerns that I think might be interesting to think about from where I'm standing. And this is obviously just as a starting point to try and get to learn more about the SMIDGE project as it goes forward. I think the opening remarks around the fact that we miss out the middle age is pertinent. It happens very much in our field, and yes, there is the cliche, let's say the youth, but the youth are not the only problems today. So what's contributing to the growth of far-right movements among middle-aged demographics? Well, essentially, I would say that a lot of it is about economic insecurity to do with globalization. The precarity of the labor markets means that the traditional job for life scenario has pretty well disappeared. It kind of disappeared a very long time ago, but it very much has gone in, particularly around industrial sectors, manufacturing, small industries. Some sections of society have completely been decimated over the last 30, 40, 50 years, particularly when we think about the UK. Post-industrial towns have seen a significant decline and no revitalization. Regions in the north of the country, of England, the mills, the foundries, the engineering sectors and so on, they haven't been replaced. So all the jobs have gone to the south of the country in finance and tech. It's also a precarious situation for men who would ordinarily go into a job in a factory for life, perhaps working with cousins and uncles, now have to compete with women in a global marketplace for jobs in the service sector economy and that they haven't been trained for. So the globalization issues and the impact it has on the labor market, and also because of technological change here too, where men used to build cars. Well, not during the Second World War, of course. Women used to build the trucks, but that's another story. But the issue is that robots build cars. So automation in the workplace is also affecting labor market precarity and ambiguity. We also have long-standing concerns around immigration that have been part of the far-right narrative, the right discourse, or even a conservative discourse that has been part of certainly the UK landscape and many European landscapes today. And there have been a little bit of a certain sort of number of shocks to the system, the refugee crisis of the mid-2015s, the ongoing flow of people out of the Middle East for the last 25 years due to wars, persecution, famine, and so on. And so this global movement of people, at any one point in time, 400 million people are on the move for jobs and opportunities. Sometimes they're significantly within the move within the region that they're part of. For example, most of the movements within Southeast Asia are within those parts of the world. But we have a particular situation in Europe where it's very difficult for people to arrive as primary economic migrants unless you're extremely highly skilled, or you bring net wealth with you. And that's often sometimes a fast-track passport route as well. And that tells you some of the kind of standards around how we treat different types of arriving groups. But there is very little by way of direct opportunities to enter into an economy unless you're highly skilled. So this also then leads to fears around the fact that immigrants are taking jobs that we can't do and playing on existing ideas of xenophobia and dare I mention it, racism and structural inequalities that have always placed the position of people of darker skin in more complex realities. Let's put it without making it sound too obvious. There is also, so the cultural anxieties around immigration. And people here are talking then about not necessarily the economic, which is what's essentially behind the issues. And in fact, Western Europe needs immigration, otherwise there are many implications down the line. But it's presented as somehow a culture problem, a culture war, that somehow this alien culture is diluting our culture and we need to take our country back. And a lot of this is also exacerbated by our politicians. Just mentioning Brexit earlier among our colleagues. Lots of barefaced lies essentially were talked about, that our country was going to be free to make our own decisions, or have our own borders, and all the other nonsense that came out unchecked by the majority of the intelligentsia, certainly at the time. And the campaign was hugely distorted and obviously targeted using social media techniques. There is also then a disillusionment with general politics. So there's no real trust in politics. Over the last 20 years in Western Europe, we've seen a gradual decline in social trust and political trust. So why is that? Well, we don't trust institutions because they don't work for us. Politicians have been routinely unable to meet the demands of people's needs, citizens' needs, everyday needs and norms. Instead, there's been a greater tendency towards oligarchic influences in policymaking, simply put. It's led to a real democratic disconnect. People don't trust the political process. They don't think it's fair. It doesn't represent their voice. And so the conspiracy theories then take hold. So in all of these, ideas, or certainly alternative theories to the ideas of who has power, we did a lot of work with talking to young people here in the Netherlands, but also elsewhere across Northwest Europe. And this idea that there are these super powerful elites somehow pulling the strings of governments. This is among young people, but clearly we see this among older people, that there are these influences beyond powers of government and even royal families. And there are more than slightly anti-Semitic tropes thrown in there as well, on the whole. But this idea of global foreign elites somehow dictating matters that are of our country's nature, that are being therefore contaminated by these others, it goes on. But then we also have specific narratives. The anti-immigrant sentiment is routinely used by far-right groups. Pegida was born on the back of the refugee crisis in Germany. A year later, we had the birth of Pegida NL. And it's the middle-aged who are part of that, who turn up to those events and who make the most noise. It doesn't attract young people in the way we might think that far-right extremism might be attracted to young people in the way that Islamist extremism sometimes is. There is also a very powerful narrative of Islamophobia, which people buy into, feed into, support, redefine and redevelop. And that's not going away when political elites refuse to acknowledge it, consider it, even speak to it in any real meaningful way. And yes, it's important to realize that Islamophobia is an important, valuable discourse around discrimination and exclusion. And there are some criticisms of the concept, but in reality, there is an observable, generalizable tendency to tend to see Muslims and Islam in very reduced forms, not emphasizing or realizing and acknowledging past the history, the interaction, the exchange, the knowledge sharing, the knowledge building, and also the fact that 99% of Muslims in Europe, of which there are 35 million in the post-war migration context, not excluding, obviously excluding indigenous communities to Europe, Eastern Europe in particular, are beyond the radar when we think about extremism, yet they're caught under Islamophobic ideas relating to extremism, including among policymakers. So these open up all sorts of questions around what we do about them. We can talk about that as well. The methods used by far-right groups tend to be social media, and it tends to be all about social media. It's talking couple of days ago at the Europol conference, there is no more this idea of these shadowy figures tapping on the shoulders of disgruntled young people in mosques 25 years ago as being the kind of driver or precursor to extremism. It's all happening online, and it's the misinformation, disinformation, compounded by not really being sure of what's being shared. And when people willy-nilly do it, uncles and aunts are doing it and somehow reproducing racist ideas unbeknown to them necessarily. Because they don't know the provenance of some of this material or its legitimacy, but it seems to appeal to a certain emotion at the time, and this is where we do have these kind of digital issues, emotionality and lack of absolute objectivity creates many challenges. So the impacts are that it does strain social cohesion. It increases polarization, it increases mistrust and adds to a further cycle. Minority groups feel considerably under pressure, under strain, and therefore resist, but then they're regarded as self-styled groups that don't want to integrate. So then that also feeds into the far-right rhetoric that these people don't want to be part of our society, and yet they are really looking after themselves because nobody else is prepared to do so, including the state, especially the state. All of these great ideas that we used to talk about in lavish terms in the 1990s about multiculturalism and pluralism and diversity and inclusion, these are all dirty words now. Don't repeat them, although you will be sentenced, condemned before you know it, because how dare you evoke this wokeism and challenge the norms that we have so rightly put together over the centuries. Enough already, kind of thing. And this gets inflamed and reproduced through the political landscape. And there's no shortage of right-wing politicians, including in Hungary, including in India, that use hyper-masculinity, hyper ideas of the strong man, family man, always gendered too. It's patriarchal, it's gendered, it's racial, and powerful in that respect. So what to do about this? Well, for me, there's obviously lots of room for small tweaks, but there are deep structural issues around what's behind here, these concerns. And we see that with young people, but I think also what we see with older people is what we might have seen with young people 25, 30 years ago. This sort of precarity, the lack of rootedness, the insecurity about the future, the inability to keep up with change. This generation of the current sort of stock of over 50-year-olds, we've seen everything. We've gone from telephone sort of home connections to wireless communications and no more television with four channels, but 400 channels. So we are completely drowned by choice, and studies tell us that we have too much choice. We often make the wrong choice. Okay, so I'll just stop it there. Just a few remarks about how some of the structural factors are very important and how this is then mediated through a cultural political landscape where there are lots of inequities and inequalities and polarization, and the political elites are not helping. In fact, they're exacerbating the problem. But if we can think about economic equality, then we might be able to think about bridging some of the structural issues, but that's a long way off anybody's political radar at the moment. And so we're left with small tweaks at the individual level, which then has the risk of regarding these concerns at the individual level when they're in fact, for me, structural, historical, and deeply manifested in all sorts of institutions. Thank you for your time. Thanks for your attention. Looking forward to your comments.
Thank you so much, Professor Abbas. I think quite a strong introduction, a lot to take in, and I'm sure these will come back in the questions and discussions. Now let me invite Dr. Pawelz for her introduction. Please, the floor is yours. I think you, and thank you so much for the effort of putting together PowerPoint. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Well, thank you for having me, and I will briefly share my screen with you. I think you can see it well. And
yes.
Hear me well as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I will use my 10 minutes for briefly introducing my research institute, our research project, and then give you some of insights in the functionalities of conspiracy theories, and with some actual trends in Germany that are happening right now. So the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy at the University of Hamburg is a small research institute with 85 employees, 45 scientists from political science, sociology, and natural sciences. We're funded by the City of Hamburg and third-party funding. And we work on topics such as arms control, European security, radicalization, terrorism, and climate change. The main questions that we try to answer in our research are: what makes the world unsafe? How do conflicts escalate? And what are the social conditions for peace? And one of the research projects based at our institutes are the NeoVex project, Patterns and Dynamics of Conspiracy Theories and Far-Right Ideologies in Times of Crisis. I'm the coordinator of this project. It's a joint project with a total of 12 researchers from 4 institutes and universities. And they come from different fields of study: political science, sociology, communication studies, and also data science. We are funded for 3 years, and this is our last year. So we are wrapping up, writing papers, and we will publish our work in summer and end of this year. We got 1.8 million from the Ministry of Education and Research, and our main aim is to analyze how violence is legitimated through narratives of conspiracy theories and far-right ideologies, what the transnational entanglements of actors are, what the networks are, and what role the platforms actually play. And after having done this, we will hopefully fully understand what mobilization potential arises from the overlap of these narratives. We have 4 institutes. So this is my research institute, and we work together with Simon Hegelich from the Technical University in Munich and Annette Heft from the Free University of Berlin and the Institute for Democracy and Civil Society in Jena. And I invite you to have a look at our website, where we publish our pre-results of our research in German, but I don't think it's, well, it's easy to translate if you're really interested in our results. Now I would like to give you some insight into the workings of conspiracy theories, because I think it might contribute to your research question, trying to understand why the older parts of the populations are prone to anti-democratic views and conspiracy theories and far-right populist ideas. So usually we find that conspiracy theories actually tell a story from the end to the beginning. So there's a certain event or something happening, or somebody said something, or a pandemic, and a conspiracy theory tells what happened before this event came to our knowledge. Usually the projections of the future are those very apocalyptic. The corona pandemic is a good example of that. In their storytelling, it's also about world domination and political reorganization, and not only about a virus.
Dr. Pawelz, sorry to interject.
Yes.
Were you thinking of changing the slides as you're speaking, or we're still
changing? You don't see the changing?
No, we are not seeing. That's what I wanted to. Maybe if you put it as a slide share, the little button, maybe it will work better. I don't know. But we're still at the front page of your slide.
Wow, well, I'm not. So.
Yes, that's why I wanted. So I noticed that, and I thought you might. Okay,
okay, I will. Do you see something different now?
No, still at the. Maybe it's.
Well, does anybody know how to change that? Because
I think if you click to, and now we are seeing, yeah. How do conspiracy theories work? Yes.
okay, but okay, you actually see that? Do you see everything now? Because I started the presentation and
Now we see, yeah, a strategic decontextualization and the appearance of, yeah.
okay.
This is what you're seeing now.
Well,
But
I'm
maybe
sorry,
if you, no problem, but if you put it in the slide, share the little button at the, where you can zoom in and zoom out, maybe it will look a bit bigger. Yeah, and you see, yeah, and you see a small, like a screen button there towards the minus, like there is a small button. Yeah, that one. I think if you click that, it might go as a,
yeah, well, that's what I had before, so we will see. Do you see any changes?
no, we don't. So I guess we return.
Yeah.
Sorry about it. Sorry. I
Um,
guess we continue with what was
yeah,
working. Yes. Okay.
yeah.
Sorry.
So we will have to stay with this. Yeah, that's too bad for you that you didn't get to see the presentation and the slides that I had before, but it is what it is. So you can see my slide, strategic decontextualization and the appearance of scientific facts, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll just continue right now. So usually conspiracy theories combine real facts and real incidents, which they put together as apparent evidence. And there are also strategies or papers that were published and taken out of context and reconstructed into a new story, which makes it very difficult to refute. One of the best examples is the Great Reset and the book that was published by people who attended the World Economic Forum, and the conspiracy actors made a different story out of it. Successful communication is one of the key ingredients in successful conspiracy theories, because if nobody hears about them, obviously they're not successful. They use effective multimedia strategies. That means professional websites, but also podcasts, lots of interview formats where conspiracy actors invite other people to share their seemingly expert knowledge about certain topics. Very popular are TV formats in which they present themselves as news moderators and interpret world news in their own views. Messenger services such as Telegram, of course, but also classic book publications. Interestingly, many use alleged inside knowledge to feed their conspiracy theories. They claim that there's exclusive secret information that they have about internal processes, about secret plans and their evil intentions. You all have heard about QAnon and the whistleblower Q, who shares insights from top secret American agencies, apparently. And very popular are videos about victims and witnesses and survivors who survived brutal satanic sects. And one point that's quite important to point out, that even though these books or videos are exposed as being false, they continue to be spread, such as the Milestone book on Freemasonry and the secrets revealed about them by Leo Taxir, but also the Protocols of Zion that is still being shared in the far-right scene. On the one hand, conspiracy theories are grassroots phenomena and linked to crisis situations, but also there are always individual interests and economic interests of key actors. So it's not a purely reactive functional phenomenon, because there are individuals who actually take advantage of it. very obvious in their online shops that you can find on many websites, where you can actually donate money or buy equipment, prepping or esoteric things that you might need. Usually they are based on emotional language and content, so they reach two levels: the cognitive level, by providing content-related arguments about a certain theory, but also using emotions, mostly fear, to actually make people spread the word, join the movement, and yeah, sometimes even take up their arms. Child abuse and adrenochrome are very frequently shared, because it's one of the deepest fears that we have, that we might lose a child to satanic forces and so on. So what to do? It is difficult to refute conspiracy theories because they are often linked to real backgrounds and persons and strategy papers. So it's not very easy to use arguments and empirical counter evidence to defute them. They are seemingly immune to criticism. And now I would like to give you some insights to the German situation, because I'm not sure how well aware you are. And there's a study that sheds light on right-wing extremist and anti-democratic attitudes in Germany. And they found out that lately the trust in institutions and democracy has fallen below 60%. So for instance, more than 30% think that media and politicians are working together, and also that the ruling parties are deceiving the people. And around 20% think that our country is more likely a dictatorship than a democracy. And the approval and the justification of political violence is on the rise significantly, as 13% now believe that politicians actually deserve it when anger against them turns into violence. When it comes to right-wing popular parties, you might have heard about the Alternative for Germany, founded in 2013. It's a right-wing populist party that successfully instrumentalized many crisis situations in Germany to garner support for their own ideas and party. In the federal elections, they gained around 10%, but as the map shows, they're very popular among eastern states. Around 30% in the eastern states. They gained around 30% in the eastern states. And now we're talking about age, and so almost 2/3 of those who actually vote for AfD are male, and the party is most successful among the middle-aged groups between 35 and 59. There were farmer protests in Germany this year, and anti-democratic actors tried to instrumentalize these demonstrations by framing them as a movement against the ruling parties. Also, a journalist group uncovered a secret meeting in November, but published it in January, where members of political parties in Germany and the identitarian movement attended and apparently talked about a plan for the deportation of non-Germans and refugees called remigration. This caused lots of anti-AfD protests in Germany, and this is the positive note that I would like to end my presentation with, to show you that there are still far more people who support democracy and take a stand against the AfD. If you'd like to contact me, you can do so. And now I'm interested in our talk. And I will stop the presentation now. Yes.
Yeah, thank you a lot, Dr. Pawelz. I think this was quite very good follow-up to Professor Abbas with some also concrete cases into how conspiracy theories work. It stuck with me how you elegantly put it that it's difficult to refute sometimes these conspiracies, although they sound like there's a common sense that that's not the case, but it becomes very difficult to do so. And then sometimes when you're engaging, perhaps you're even helping, giving more like echo to such theories. Let me now invite Dr. Hall for her introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. I also have some slides. I'll just quickly
Thank
share
you so
them
much.
if that's okay. I'll just, oops, maybe I don't want to share that. Stop that. That's not exactly what I want to share. I want to share Windows, and I'm not as familiar with Teams. Aha. I'm going to press present and tell me whether, is it working this time?
Yes, we can see it.
Presenting?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much for having me. I'm Natalie-Anne Hall. I'm a lecturer in social sciences at Cardiff University. And I've been involved in some large projects related to everyday encounters with misinformation, but also some project on Russian disinformation. But today's talk is going to draw on some findings from my doctoral research, which I recently published in a book called Brexit, Facebook and Transnational Right-Wing Populism. And specifically, I'm going to talk about the role of social media and how these facilitate opportunism by far-right actors wanting to disseminate their ideology to new audiences. So the context of this research is in the UK, and it's between 2017 and 2019, which was after the referendum in which the UK voted to leave the EU. And it was while negotiations were going on between the UK and the EU about the exit deal and the so-called divorce bill, but it was before Brexit had actually taken place. So at that time, we saw a lot of angry mobilizations around the idea of saving Brexit, and what we could call populist discourses that positioned Brexit as the will of the people and claimed that this was under threat from elites like EU actors and then Prime Minister Theresa May, who were allegedly trying to stop Brexit. So there were multiple large street protests in London, which were organized online, and including through some of the many pro-Brexit groups and pages that had emerged on Facebook, sorry, some of which had tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers. And in this context, my project was looking at some of the people who were participating in this pro-Brexit realm on Facebook and how this sort of online advocacy for Brexit was related to right-wing populist discourses and also to far-right ideology. So I did in-depth interviews with 15 of these pro-Brexit Facebook users on 2 occasions each, and I also asked them to let me follow them on Facebook for 1 month so that I could understand how the sorts of experiences and attitudes that they told me about might be related to the kinds of content that they were seeing and sharing on Facebook. And it's particularly relevant to the aims of the SMIDGE project in that I targeted non-digital natives for this project, so people who didn't grow up with the internet, and I defined that as people who were born before 1980, so these were people 40 years and above at the time, roughly. And this was to acknowledge, as has been mentioned, this kind of different experience of adapting to digital technology in adulthood, as compared with being introduced to these kind of technologies during childhood. And this kind of different experience that we've touched upon of social change that has occurred around that. So the study of far-right influence in the UK context is actually highly relevant to the study of the EU, even though, of course, the UK has already left the EU technically. But it's it's relevant to the study of the EU and the Western Balkans, not only because Eurosceptic narratives are being peddled by far-right political actors across the EU as part of their political strategy, but because the milieu or this ideological space in which these Brits found themselves on Facebook included both highly local narratives about British and English nationalism and a lot of international narratives. So they spoke about, or they referred to events around the world that involved immigration, such as in Italy or Spain or Germany or France, but also South Africa and Australia. And they used these as justification for the far-right racist ideologies that were being propagated. And they also really revered far-right politicians around the world, Trump, Le Pen, Salvini, etc. So the far-right influence has a strong transnational character. And so I treat this study as a microcosm or an example through which to investigate the transnational nature of the online dissemination of far-right ideology today. And what I found was that the pro-Brexit milieu on Facebook was a place where everyday racism, nationalism, and Eurosceptic discourses intermingled with far-right ideas. So the users that I spoke to didn't define themselves as far-right, and they didn't seem to think that they were engaging with particularly extreme ideas, but they nonetheless espoused far-right ideology, racial exclusionism, and they selectively drew on ideas from far-right conspiracy theories. So one of the ways in which right-wing populism funnels people into the far-right or into far-right conspiracy theories is through its Manichaean or good versus evil way of structuring the world. And this is a framing that is common to both populism and conspiracy theories. And it was actually key to the link between populist discourses and conspiracy narratives in the pro-Brexit Facebook milieu. So in the narratives that were being circulated in this milieu, the issue of Brexit was constructed as an epic battle between good and evil that would determine the fate of democracy, freedom, and even civilization itself. And as one participant, who I call Eileen, said, this isn't about Brexit anymore, really. In fact, in the pro-Brexit Facebook milieu, Brexit was constructed as part of a much bigger system or agenda, and the users that I spoke to were consistently drawing links between this European integration and things like multiculturalism, political correctness, media bias, and gender rights. And they were rehearsing and reproducing narratives that they'd encountered online about an impending Islamization of Britain and of the West, alongside other alleged agendas to enforce racial mixing and multiculturalism. So in this way, we can see how the Great Replacement theory, conspiracy theory, was being propagated by the far right in the pro-Brexit space. Several of the users that I spoke to actually mentioned specifically a conspiracy theory called the Kalergi Plan, which is basically an EU-specific variant of the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. And it was particularly popular with the alt-right at the time as well, globally. But this is the idea that the real reason behind the European project is a plan for enforced ethnic mixing and the elimination of the white race. So in the narratives within the pro-Brexit Facebook milieu, this was allegedly part of a broader left-wing agenda aimed at forcing unwanted progressive social change. So this milieu was promoting the idea that transgender rights, gay rights, and even feminism were part of an agenda to create a dystopian communist society that was normalizing sexual deviance. And here the cultural Marxism conspiracy theory was being referenced. And this is the idea that there's a global conspiracy of communists trying to infiltrate the realm of culture to brainwash the masses to socialism. And this conspiracy theory is particularly popular within the far right even now. And some of the users mentioned cultural Marxism specifically by name, but others just talked of a Marxist plot to bring down Europe. And they don't mean the EU, they mean white Europe. Or they portrayed the EU itself as evil communist organization, or they simply described political correctness as an agenda that was molding people's minds without us being aware of it. So that's a quote from a participant. So all of this was able to be linked to Brexit in the narratives on Facebook because European integration was seen as a left-wing concern. And these users were discovering these ideas on Facebook thanks to the affordances of the platform that allowed far-right actors to deliberately capitalize upon the populist discourses of the post-referendum period. But it was also facilitated by algorithms which recommend users increasingly extreme content to promote user engagement and to generate profit for the platforms. And the borderless nature of social media also enabled the concerns of the British users to be linked to similar experiences and sentiments in other parts of the world. And this validated and emboldened these sentiments. It's transnational white victimhood and what I call right victimhood work together to strengthen racist, exclusionary, and illiberal ideologies. And the users in this milieu also placed a high value on Facebook itself as a place where they could speak up or speak out, as a source of information that they alleged was being hidden from them by the mainstream media, and as a tool for fighting back. In other words, Facebook itself empowered this right-wing activism and fed into the narrative of rising up against alleged victimization. So what can we take away from this? Populist discourses can act as a gateway to far-right ways of seeing the world because they demonize opponents, they dramatize politics and social change, and this can be very captivating. And we're seeing the mainstreaming of the Great Replacement and cultural Marxism conspiracy theories, which now also appear in rhetoric by members of the UK government. Particularly cultural Marxism has been mentioned. And the far right is aggressively and opportunistically promoting these conspiracy theories. And social media can play a huge role in this dissemination, not only through its affordances and algorithms, but also through the role that it has come to play in our personal and political lives, and the value that can be attached to this online activism and counter politics. So I'll stop there for now, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hall, for this presentation. I think it's moving. We have a very good flow from Professor Abbas outlining also the concept, but discussion on the impact of the far right, and now the case in Germany, the Brexit in England, and now Dr. Karčić bringing this home in a sense of also for us at least physically bringing the issue in the Western Balkans. We always are known as with the wars we had in the 90s, but it was a period of tranquility relatively, I think, since. But we are seeing our region becoming increasingly attractive meeting point for EU far right, and even far right in EU and Russia to some extent, I would say. And Dr. Karčić, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to be a part of this webinar with such great experts. And yeah, as Dan said, the Balkans always create some sort of history and trouble all over the region. So the thing with the far right is that even though it's something relatively new in the region, or sort of say new in the sense that it has recently gotten attention, the issue with the far right in the Balkans is that it actually goes back quite some time in the past. So when we talk about
sorry, Hikmet, to interrupt you. We seem to hear a bit of crunchy when you speak, like some kind of as if the mic is hitting the. I don't know if we can fix that.
Let me test it. Sorry.
Oh, now it sounded better. Yeah.
Is it good now?
If you speak, yeah, I think so. I guess, yeah. Even
okay,
if it's not, we won't interrupt you.
I will try. I'll talk slower. So that when we talk about the far right in the Balkans, one of the things that we need to know is that it goes quite back into history. So when we talk about far-right movements and ideologies in the Balkans, it's very closely connected to ethno-nationalist ideologies as well, which existed here in the Balkans. So this is directly related to the World War II events. namely during the Second World War in the area of the former Yugoslavia. We had two Nazi puppet governments which existed. It was the independent state of Croatia with the Ustaša regime, and on the other side we had the military regime of Milan Nedić, which was controlled by Nazi Germans. So in both cases we had Nazi governed areas. The Ustaša regime and the royalist forces within the Nedić, or were against the Nedić government, that was the so-called Chetnik forces. These two major forces during the Second World War committed large amounts of mass atrocities against other minorities. So, for example, the Ustaša regime was infamous for having the Jasenovac concentration camp, where they slaughtered and committed a genocide against Serbs, Jews, and Roma. And the Chetniks were famous for committing mass atrocities and genocide against Bosniak Muslims and Albanians. And so these two forces were defeated in the Second World War. And in Yugoslavia, in the post-war Yugoslavia, the partisan movement, the communist movement, controlled Yugoslavia and had actually put both of these movements under some sort of embargo. So they didn't exist at all, and they were entirely kicked out from the country. And so these two movements actually continued to exist in the immigration. So in the US, in Germany, in Italy, in Australia, and so on and so forth. Fast forward 50 years, when the Yugoslav war started to appear in 1991, and actually with the fall of communism and the first democratic elections, these former emigres financed new national or ethnic-based parties, which were new at that time in the former Yugoslavia. So what happened was that the survivors of or the descendants, or even those actually who were Ustašas or Chetniks in the Second World War, were directly funding new political parties which were set up in 1990. So here we have some sort of continuity of this ideology. And in 1991 and 1992, for the first time in Europe, after the Second World War, neo-Nazi and Nazi insignia, slogans, and so on were publicly shown within official regular military units in the former Yugoslavia. More concretely, this was very evident within the Croatian army, or actually more specifically, the Croatian defense forces, which were located in Bosnia. So you had people there in regular units, which attracted skinheads, neo-Nazis from all over the world to come and to fight as foreign fighters inside Bosnia and Croatia. And so this was actually the first time that we had foreign fighters coming, and on something which everybody knows already is the Muslim aspect of the foreign fighter movement. But this aspect of the neo-Nazis coming to fight in Bosnia is something which is still, let's say, to a large extent under-researched. And so there's that one aspect that after the war ended, these foreign fighters went back to their home countries and continued living there and continued their activities within the neo-Nazi movement. One of the best examples of this is Jackie Arklov, a neo-Nazi from Sweden, who fought within the Croatian Defense Forces, and after 1995 he returned back to Sweden and set up a new neo-Nazi organization within Sweden, and he was arrested later on for murdering 2 Swedish police officers. So Jackie Arklov is like one of the is one of the poster figures of this neo-Nazi movement, which is related to the wars in Bosnia. The war in the former Yugoslavia gave wings to the far-right movement in Europe, because the whole ideology behind behind what the far-right movements today in Europe see as appealing, such as the earlier mentioned Great Replacement theory, was something which was very actively used during the war in Bosnia, or specifically against in the context of the genocide against the Bosniak Muslims. So the theory as Bosniak Muslims being the demographic bomb of Europe was something which was used by genocidaires such as Ramadan Ilazi, Milosevic, and others. And so this isn't, that's why it's not so shocking that the rhetoric of people like Karadzic was later on very appealing to terrorists such as Breivik and Tarrant some 20, 30 years later on. Because if you read their manifestos, you can see their citations and their admiration of the Bosnian Serb army and of Karadzic, Milosevic, and the others. So in that context, what we have two major connections with the Balkans or with the former Yugoslavia. Firstly is the connection from the outside world into Yugoslavia, talking about the period between 1990 to 1995, the time when these former when the former immigration, the Croat and Serb immigration comes back after the fall of communism, comes back into Yugoslavia. Then we have the neo-Nazis, skinheads, and everybody else, the foreign fighters coming to fight. And then after the war, what we have is extreme ethno-nationalist ideologies in combination with far-right ideologies being exported outside from Yugoslavia, outside into the world, basically. And what is most shocking is that these two examples, which I mentioned earlier, both happened in areas which are, let's say, very peaceful. New Zealand and Norway, which came from two people who did not have any personal connection with the conflict. And in at least one case, in the case of Tarrant, he personally visited the area as some sort of pilgrimage in the post-war period. So this is something new that we are witnessing. And now I would come to the third stage of the far-right segment, and this is the war, or say the post-Ukraine war era. So after 2014, when the war in Ukraine started, we have a new shift in the foreign fighters. So this time again, foreign fighters from the Balkans are going to Ukraine to fight. So you have people from Croatia, a smaller number going to fight with the Ukrainians. Then you have a larger number of Serbs from Serbia and from Bosnia going to fight with the pro-Russian armies there. And what is interesting is that in most cases, some of the leading recruiters of these foreign fighters are indeed former foreign fighters who fought in the Balkans. So in the case of the Croats, it is a former French volunteer. In the case of the Serbs, it's a former Russian volunteer. So we have this third stage of this event, and significantly, there's a new segment as well in which through football fans in the Balkans, there are connections with Ukrainian far-right movements, such as a football club in the Croat majority town of Mostar, of Western Mostar, has very good connections with the Azov movement. And then you have Serbian football clubs which have good connections with Russian, with pro-Russian forces in Ukraine and in Russia. More recently, 2 days ago, there was a football match in Bosnia where the supporters of one football team from Bijeljina, which is in eastern Bosnia, put up a slogan in support of Donbass. So this is something which is very interesting to see. and it's the connection between football fans and Dan knows this very well. Football fans, far right or state organized crime is not something new that we see in the former Yugoslavia. This is something which has always been very well connected in the former Yugoslavia. And this region right now, the Balkans, it is a very, let's say, an area which is known for its corruption, for its weak state institutions, and so on, and especially with having the Bosnian Serb entity as a hub for pro-Russian forces, has become a meeting point for different pro-Russian organizations coming in over time. So, for example, the infamous Night Wolves are regular visitors to official entity, the Bosnian Serb entity celebrations. More recently, on the 9th of January, when the illegal Republika Srpska Day was celebrated, the Night Wolves were there standing next to the Russian and Chinese ambassador, for example, along with, of course, the officials from Serbia. A number of Russian diplomats who haven't been accredited in other EU countries or European countries are accredited in Bosnia or in Montenegro or North Macedonia, and a number of other, let's say, far-right individuals, such as Robert Rundo, for example, who's from the US, who belongs to the Rise Above movement. He, for example, has been going on and about throughout the whole region, meeting up with all of these different pro-Russian and Serb nationalist organizations throughout the region. And of course, this is a man who has been under the radar of European and American security services for some time right now. So in conclusion, this area of the Balkans has become, with its very complex history of the past, it has right now become not only an area for inspiration for the far right, but also an area where the far right can very easily come and meet up, exchange ideas, and connect, basically network, without being under the radar of any major institution whatsoever, or if I would be free to put it, under the support of certain pro-Russian or other institutional enablers, so to say, in the region. And with that, I end my short presentation, and I'm happy to continue this discussion later on in the Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Karčić, and to all the colleagues. I think a lot of material to process. The timing shows that we had a very good presentations. So I would invite those who are attending, if they want to pose their questions, please do so. We have about 20 minutes or so at our disposal. So please feel free to ask your questions to our colleagues. But I will open up perhaps with one question, and we will start again with the same kind of row from Professor Abbas to Dr. Karčić. My question is, the EU seems to be a common denominator often in these far-right movements, in a sense of anti-EU sentiment, promoting EU as the boogeyman, in a sense, the problem rather than the solution. Is this because EU is an easy target in EU member states, in a sense, or is it that in a way there isn't a lot of information about what EU is and does, or is there a genuine discontent or dissatisfaction with the EU in that sense? Because You know, even in France, right? The Front National or National March now, I think they're changed the name. You know, it's all about exiting EU as well. Even though the lesson from UK is that it's not that kind of a smart. Perhaps I'm not trying to make any judgment here. You can speak, right, Sarah and Dr. Hall, but just that it's more difficult, this kind of divorce, and maybe intentionally. So why is this with EU? So we start with Professor Abbas and then coming. And in the meantime,
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think it's a good question. Right? I mean, in many ways, it's simply a geographical boundary. It's a political space, but it's also a construction, and therefore always something that can be targeted. But we have to think about some of the ideas that are seen as problematic. Are they in the imagination of people, or is it just a function of reality? Because obviously the European Union contains nations that were the foreground in modern scientific racism and eugenics and nativist authoritarian populist ideas. So that's where it all came from. Some of it is still there. So I don't think it's entirely kind of alien to understanding the EU, but as singling out a massive trading bloc of 30+ nations as somehow unified and organized and coordinated in a way that is somehow reflective of some powers that are manipulating it or are being manipulated by it, is just fantasy. And I think that's the problem here. It's an easy target, certainly from the UK point of view, and thinking about the Brexit discussions and how it was framed. And this led to misunderstanding and obviously not helped by misinformation. But within the EU, there's plenty of infighting. There's plenty of love and hate, lots of hate, probably very little love. And there's still the big players within the EU that dictate the matters for the rest of the players in the EU. And that's very much how old Europe used to operate. And old Europe still effectively is the power within the modern construction of the EU. So it's not a very specific answer, but I'm just speculating as to what might be happening. But I think it's quite fantastical to single out a single organization. And that's just my view on conspiracy theories. There may be some grain of truth at a very micro level that could be hooked onto, but the rest is just furtive imagination.
Thank you, Professor Abbas. Dr. Pawelz, your impressions?
Well, yeah, my impression is that it does play a role in mobilizing support. So when it comes to the party that I mentioned before, the AfD, they started as a EU critical party. And I think the point that I would like to make is that the feeling of powerlessness and being not in political control is something that contributes to the disenchantment and the feeling of discontent with political parties. And this disconnect between the EU government and the people in the nation states is something that populist parties such as the AfD like to mobilize and pick up on, because it's a fear that people have that there might be the big elite making decisions against their own will. And that's one of the points. So something that would be useful to counter this anti-EU sentiments would be to open arenas of political participation on a EU level for those people who like to have more control of what's going on. But that's more on a theoretical basis.
Thank you so much. This is the democracy sufficit deficit debate, right? Is there real participation on, and if there is participation, is it really influencing anything, right? Dr. Hall?
Thanks. Yeah, it's a good question. I do think the EU is an easy target for these kind of political actors who are opportunistic. I think particularly in the UK, people didn't know much about the EU. they haven't engaged with how it works. So there is that mystery there, and that's a vacuum that can be filled. I think back to what Professor Abbas said in the beginning, the economic side of things and that kind of economic climate, all of these economic crises that we've been experiencing over the past few decades have coincided with this increased European integration, and not to say that that one has caused the other, but it's easy to link those in the minds of voters perhaps, and to use that as an easy target to blame. And I also think that despite what we know about these right-wing or neoliberal foundations of the EU, it is a left-wing symbol, or it can become a left-wing symbol. It symbolizes multiculturalism through the immigration. It symbolizes progressivism, and in the UK in particular, on the left, as soon as the debate about whether to leave the EU came out, the left took up a Europhilia that sort of was easy to turn into or to construct as the left once again thinking it knows better than everybody else, and this sort of like the way that the EU then becomes attached to leftism makes it an easy target for the right, who tries to demonize that in the ways that we've seen in the study that I presented as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hall. This is to me, very interesting that that EU is attached to leftism in a way, in perceptions, right? So the perception is that, okay. Dr. Karčić, Balkans has also interesting relation with EU. Bosnia was just granted candidate status, if I'm not mistaken, and so we are wanting to join in the Balkans, 6 countries, the EU, but then the discussion in EU is among many have to leave. So it's very interesting kind of addition we bring.
One of the things I noticed in some of the previous research is that a lot of the people who spread or finance anti-EU sentiment within the Balkans are people who actually live in the EU. People who went there in the 1990s, but who are actually promoting the idea that if you integrate into the EU, that you will assimilate and that you lose your identity, religion, nationality, and everything else. So I think that's one of the key things when we talk about the Balkans. At least one of the I'm trying to say something here which hasn't already been mentioned, and again, this comes from the generation which is 40 or 50 plus, which you mentioned earlier. So those who weren't able to maybe accommodate themselves within the new reality, whereas their children, everybody else, they are much more integrated and assimilated and so on. But this other generation, the ones who live in the past, in the glory of the past, they're the ones who are they're the ones who are voting for the anti-EU parties or nationalist parties back home, or they're financing and supporting movements or spreading conspiracy theories about how you won't be able to how your children will be taught some things in kindergarten and things like that. Spreading these kind of conspiracy theories through the social media. So that's my take on this issue. But regarding Bosnia, I just wanted to say that the European Union leadership said that we made significant progress. I don't know whether that's right or not. I don't believe it is, but I thank them for giving us the candidate status. So that's a great step forward.
Well, thanks, Dr. Karčić. So my concluding question to you is, what is the end goal? What is the far right looking at achieving, in a sense? Is it exits from EU? Is it stronger migration policies? Is it as Dr. Pawelz mentioned, the case in Germany about removing migrants? So what kind of vision if there is any that we can kind of like deduce from their work, like towards what kind of vision they are investing, or it is less cohesive, less homogeneous than perhaps we think. It's different far-right groups having different kind of ideas what they want to do, and especially going back to that EU is. We had a conversation how, for instance, the older generation, this kind of middle-aged group we talk about, should be more, I guess, understanding of a reality in Europe without this kind of cooperation, because EU promotes itself as a peace-building project. As you know, often in EU narrative, they want to say we are a peace project. At the end of the day, the EU got the Nobel Peace Prize, I think it was in 2012, for maintaining the longest period of peace known in Europe for 50 years or so. So, but now, so is it just undoing EU and then going back to these more nation states, stronger national states in a sense, sovereignty, or what's the end goal here? Because sometimes then far-right also cooperates so much with each other. So as though if they want to redo another EU, but in their image that is more for whatever their definition is about who is European and so on. So, but can we deduce any kind of end goal in this movement? Is there something like that? Yeah. So
this time, pop my thoughts in here. I have a suspicion that the far right as a thing are a bit like a dog that chases cars. That when they finally do get that situation, that power, they actually won't know how to use it and what to do with it. They are a protest movement, pure and simple. And so that's literally, I'm not anything more I'm going to say on this because I want to hear from the panel, but that is my first thought, a dog chasing a car and not quite knowing what to do if it catches it.
Thank you, Sarah. So we go again, from Professor Abbas.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a very good analogy. I mean, I think the EU is a soft target, that's been mentioned, but there's many more concerns that the far right have, but that are beyond the EU. I think the EU is much too complex and multi-layered, but there are other issues that are captured by what the EU is trying to do, and sometimes working against what the EU is trying to do. But I think the role of the far right is indigenous to many of our European societies. They pop up every now and again. They oscillate during various crises, moments of insecurity, precarity, financial crisis, of course, 2008, and since the COVID period, when some of this really took off. People lost social contact with each other, no shared spaces, people stuck at home watching Netflix, and coming up with all sorts of very crazy ideas in isolation of each other, even more than ever before. So that just tells you that we're moving further apart. The moving further apart economically. So the haves have more than the have-nots than ever, and the divisions grow further and further. So where are our shared spaces? Where are our shared norms? Where are our shared continuities, shared histories, memories? They're all disappearing. We've got different visions of ourselves and each other. And that's not being helped by a political discourse. And yes, media and politics, it's not a conspiracy. There's often a revolving door. We know very much in the UK how that works, very powerfully so, right at the center of politics and the center of media power. So there's no conspiracy there, as it were. So unless we begin to tackle the bigger structural issues, then we have a solid foundation to build on. Then we can think about inclusion and cohesion and coherence. The fact of the matter is the reality facing so many people is so disparate and so uneven, so insecure. It's these issues, and the EU becomes an easy latch. Obviously, minorities, immigrants, Islam is a real soft target at the moment. And they will always remain. And it's not the first time that these have been targets within Europe either, of course. But just some thoughts.
Thank you so much, Professor Abbas. Dr. Pawelz?
Well, for your question, I think there are 2 points that I would like to make. And one is more on conspiracy theory narratives and far-right ideologies in general. So there's the trend that narratives are increasingly merging, overlapping, and also being less influenced by arguments to convince people with a plan or a counter argument, but more to spread mistrust among the people. So that would give us the idea that there is no plan B after taking control, because all they want to see is a political collapse, and they haven't really thought it through. On the other hand, there are some incidents such as the try to overthrow the government by sovereign citizens 1.5 years ago in Germany. They were arrested before they could do anything, but also may be interesting for you because these were all older people who gathered and made plans to kidnap a minister, and they had actually political positions carved out for themselves after the overthrow. So that's one point. On the other, the last point I would like to make is not to underestimate those kind of narratives of spreading mistrust, because as I showed you earlier, in the eastern states of Germany, the AfD actually has 30%, so most of the votes. And their plan for foreigners and refugees is to remigrate them. So there are some concrete plans for concrete problems, but I don't think there's the whole ideology of what might be next. I hope not, because Germany's history tells lots of options that we don't want to see again. So.
Thank you, Dr. Pawelz. Dr. Hall?
Yeah, I think that I agree with what everyone said so far, and that the far right is more about what it's against than about what it's for a lot of the time, and it picks up on things and it inflames anger about what it's against, and that it's a sort of a nebulous, disparate movement rather than necessarily always like an organized movement, and so they don't always have a clear vision of what they're for, what they're looking for, but they do advocate for things that we can recognize, like isolationism, racialism, like racial division, like geographic division by race, authoritarianism, and liberalism, and particularly I think that we are moving towards some of these in some countries in the world. I think they are not only vague, unachievable goals. I think they're things that are being achieved gradually through far-right mainstreaming, and also like on the cultural side, I think that they are quite clear that they are for conservative values, conservative social values. So they're against progressive social values that we are seeing become more hegemonic in society, like equality, or ideas of equality at least, between genders and ethnicities and between religions. They're against all of this. They're also against progressive ideas about gender and gender fluidity and what we're seeing becoming more of the norm. So they are definitely pushing back against this and against minority rights in general. That's what I'm seeing, yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hall. And last but not least, Dr. Karčić.
Yeah, I'll just say from the perspective of the Balkans, I think one of the biggest fears we have here is seeing far-right narratives and ideologies being mainstreamed or becoming normalized, so to say, in the EU. And this is something which we see through the works of Orban and Meloni in recent years. And why am I saying that? Because these two officials have very good connections with the far-right, more ethno-nationalist leaders in the Balkans. And monitoring the rhetoric of the ethno-nationalist and far-right leaders in the Balkans, they have several times said that they are waiting for the right geopolitical moment to execute their main plan. And that's what Milorad Dodik said a few days ago, saying that he's waiting for Trump to win the elections in the US. So what does he mean by his main plan? What does that all include? That's something which we can think about. But all in all, I mean, the idea, of course, that far-right movements and leaders aren't coherent enough, that's all correct, but slowly but surely the far-right ideology is being normalized in some aspects within the EU, and that's something which is, I think, most troubling for everyone else, because I mean, these movements, they come and go most of the time. Like Pegida isn't as strong as it was before, and maybe it doesn't even exist anymore. But the idea behind the formation of Pegida that was mentioned earlier still exists and still is very alive today, and it has been normalized, so to say. So what is the end game of the far right in connection with the EU? Probably to have some sort of ally within the EU in order to execute some of their main plans, which they have for the Balkans, which would include definitely some sort of greater Russian role in the region. But again, this is all still very unclear in the sense of what the end goal really will be. But definitely there are connections, very good connections between the far right in the Balkans with the far right political parties in the EU, which are in power right now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karčić. With that, I think our webinar has concluded. I think this was a fantastic conversation on a very concerning trend in EU and Balkans. This discussion and this webinar has been recorded, and we will disseminate it to make sure others benefit from this conversation. I want to express on behalf of KCSS and SMIDGE Project our utmost appreciation to Professor Abbas, Dr. Pawelz, Dr. Hall, and Dr. Karčić for accepting our invitation to speak at this webinar. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilford, as well, for being here to provide the support. And we'll definitely keep you updated as we move forward with the project. And again, thank you so much for being with us today. Have a fantastic weekend. It's going to be a longer weekend, and happy Easter to those who celebrate. Thank you so much again. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.